Welcome to our Virtual Voices webinar. Thank you very much for your letters and comments. We appreciate them very much. We also appreciate the fact that His Excellency Ambassador Munir Akram, the permanent representative of Pakistan to the United Nations and the president of ECOSOC, will address our audience. Dr. Hanifa Mizwi, the New York permanent representative of the Association of Economic and Social Council and similar institutions, will interview His Excellency. Our moderator is Aparv Gupta, who is on our board. Over to you, Aparv.
Thank you, Dr. Durbach. Your Excellency, thank you very much for taking out the time and joining us today. I would like to invite Dr. Hanifa Mizwi to introduce the ambassador. Dr. Mizwi has been serving on multiple leadership roles across the UN system, including serving as the chief of the NGO section of the Department of Economic and Social Affairs for almost 10 years. She has advised several international governmental organizations and NGO groups associated with the United Nations through the Economic and Social Council. I would also like to extend a warm thank you to one of our board members, Ms. Mariam Azra, for inviting His Excellency. With that, over to you, Dr. Mizwi.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the introduction. Excellency, distinguished guests, dear friends and colleagues, dear Christine Durbach, I'm honored to be here with you today for this webinar organized by the World Information Transfer and introduce to you His Excellency Mr. Munir Akram, elected 76th President of ECOSOC on 23rd July 2020. We have to note right away that Ambassador Akram is a trooper, an old-timer of the United Nations. He served twice as President of the Security Council, both in May 2003 and as well as in May 2004. President of ECOSOC in 2005, Chairman of the Group 77 in China in 2007, and facilitator on the UN administrative reform in 2006, to name just a few. In recognition of his selfless service and outstanding performance in the field of diplomacy and foreign policy, he was rightfully conferred the award of Hilal Quad Azam, which is from the President of Pakistan. This award recognizes individuals who have made a special meritorious contribution to the security or national interest of Pakistan, world peace, cultural, or other significant public endeavor. I have to add to that, dear Ambassador, to your prestigious assignment, that I was fortunate to work under your leadership in 2005 as the Chief of the NGO Section, Department of Economic and Social Affairs, DESA. I sincerely wish that I had to welcome you in a different moment than this pandemic and shine a little bit brighter. It has been now 6 months that we all are remotely working from home due to the COVID-19 lockdown. This pandemic has brought an unprecedented calamity and infinite distress around the world, a world in disarray. For the first time in the history of humanity, the whole world population on all continents is confronted with the same threat, the same fear, and the same danger. We are facing 4 crises, not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4. The COVID-19, the economic crisis, the climate change, and the explosion of racism, all at once, all related, in the midst of a celebration of the UN 75th anniversary. Ambassador Akram, 15 years have passed since your first encounter with ECOSOC, where you were busy in the preparation of the 60th anniversary of the UN. But already worried with a time set for the realization of MDGs before 2015. However, nothing in your 2005 ECOSOC agenda prepared you to find a solution to the current disaster. New challenges have emerged and remain unresolved. COVID-19 is seen as an obstacle to recalibrate the SDG framework. Which action would you take to recover from COVID-19 and reviving to the SDGs? What do you envisage in your new mandate during this time of multiple crises? Which issue will have priority?
Right.
Ambassador Akram, over to you.
Thank you very much, Hanifa. And it's nice to see you at least virtually. And I am grateful, first of all, to Mariam for inviting me and putting us in touch to organize this event. I'm grateful to our moderator, Mr. Gupta, for moderating this event. And also lovely to see Christine once again. You are all friends from better days, I guess. Hopefully, our days will get better in the future. And if you've asked about what we can do to address these 4 crises, and when I was elected about a month ago, I outlined my vision, if you will, of what the ECOSOC could do and how it could contribute to what I call triple crisis, and you added a 4th dimension, which I think is quite right. The COVID crisis, the SDG challenge, and the climate challenge, as well as what manifestations that have come forward in this crisis, the manifestations of inequality and racism to which you referred. In my view, ECOSOC, which has a mandate, which is quite broad, and it's in the charter, a mandate to promote international economic cooperation and through international economic cooperation, to promote better lives and livelihoods in larger freedoms. And that mandate gives ECOSOC a wide canvas to work on. We also, ECOSOC is the coordinating agency, coordinating body for the whole UN economic and social system, and therefore has a vision that should extend to the whole of the UN family. However, in my view, if ECOSOC is to address these crises, we cannot limit ourselves to making eloquent speeches or to focusing only on the processes with which ECOSOC has been so often preoccupied, improving the working of the council, improving the high-level political forum, evolving the QCPR and development cooperation. I believe that we should focus on some specific issues that we need to address. And I have selected 3 areas for action. Firstly, it's critical to address the financial crisis that we are facing as a result of these triple crises that beset the world. As you know, in this crisis, we first proposed, the Prime Minister of Pakistan first proposed the initiative for debt relief, and we initiated a consultative process on that. And then the Secretary General launched his initiative together with Canada and Jamaica for financing for development. And 6 working groups are working under that initiative. And Pakistan is co-chairing with the Netherlands and the African Union, their group on debt vulnerability. There are interesting proposals that are coming forward in this discussion, and these, of course, will be considered by the finance ministers on the 8th of September, and then by the heads of state at the end of September. So some interesting and important proposals coming forward. But what is coming through in this whole discussion on financing is the critical role that is played by the central banks of the countries which are the reserve currency issuing countries. If you see, these countries, the OECD countries particularly, they have issued about $10 trillion in various kinds of debt and debt instruments for themselves to spend on the recovery of their economies. 3 trillion for the US, 2 trillion for Japan, 2 trillion in the European Union, about 1 trillion in the UK. These are all debts and loan and fiscal deficit spending that has come forward from these central banks of these countries. The developing countries are estimated to require at least $2.5 trillion to recover from this crisis and to regain the path towards the SDGs. So in my view, the central political action that is required is for the developing countries to engage with the central banks of the reserve issuing countries with the appeal to find the $2.5 trillion that is necessary. And this has to be generated in various ways. It can be generated, for example, through SDR creation in the IMF. And the IMF itself at present has a lending capacity of $1 trillion, but most of that money goes to countries which already have market access. So we have to construct through the IMF and through the central banks of these major countries, the ability to generate the $2.5 trillion. And that would be, I think, the political objective that the ECOSOC should aim for, should promote, and should involve our heads of state and heads of government to bring that political message to the leaders of these richer countries, the reserve currency countries, to cooperate in order to generate that 2.5 trillion. It can be done. They have done it for themselves, and they can do it for the developing countries if there is political will. So that's the first central objective that I see for ECOSOC this year in the context of financing for development. The second area which I think we will try to focus on is the promotion of investment in sustainable infrastructure. As everybody knows, investment in sustainable infrastructure, that is infrastructure which is what is popularly called the green economy, infrastructure investment is something that resonates through the entire SDGs. It will affect poverty, job creation, housing, transportation, energy, etc. So all the SDG objectives can be promoted through investment in sustainable infrastructure, in the energy, in green energy, in renewable energy, in renewable energy-focused transportation, in green housing, in sanitation and water. These are all key elements of economic achievements that the developing countries need to make in order to promote the SDGs. What is the problem with regard to infrastructure investment? There is money in the market. There is about $15 trillion that is sitting in the banks in the Western countries earning negative interest. That is, they are losing money for keeping the money in the banks. They are losing money, and this money is looking for good investment opportunities. These investment opportunities exist in the developing countries, exist in precisely in investment in infrastructure in the developing countries, where returns can be at least as high as 10 and 15 or 20% on investment that is made. The major obstacle is that the developing countries do not have the capacity and the expertise to develop projects which are bankable, projects which the banks in the richer countries are able to see that these are investable and feasible projects that they can invest in and de-risk. Therefore, we have to create within the umbrella of the United Nations a mechanism which will help the developing countries to prepare investable projects, to prepare feasible projects that can be taken to the investors in the richer countries, the investors also in some of the developing countries, in the Gulf and China, etc. There are major investors looking for opportunities in infrastructure, and we can do that through a mechanism which will help to prepare pre-feasibility studies for the projects, feasibility studies to the investors, and get them to invest in the actual feasibility studies and to take them to the level of investment. To accompany this project preparation mechanism, we also need to build a database which would include the investors, the projects which are feasible, and the companies and corporations across the world, including the developing countries, which are capable of executing those projects. If we can bring all of that together into one through a fintech mechanism, we will be able to accelerate the preparation, investment, and execution of projects in the developing countries. And there are plenty of opportunities. The question is how to develop it and how to execute it. And that is the second area in which I hope to cooperate. I am consulting with some of the UN agencies which may have the capacity to actually operate such a mechanism. I'm also in consultation with some private sector. I was in the private sector for 10 years and raising money precisely for project investment. And therefore, I believe that if we can bring into the mix investors like the BlackRocks and others, we would be able to have a mechanism that could accelerate investment in sustainable infrastructure in the developing countries. A lot of work is happening. We have to bring it all together under the rubric of ECOSOC. The third area, which I think is critical for the SDGs, is the area of science and technology. I believe that the advances that have happened in science and technology are so critical to the achievement of the SDGs that we need to focus on exactly what has to happen in order to enable developing countries to utilize all the latest technologies that are available for progress across the SDG world. I believe at least three things we could do in the science and technology field. First of all, we need to make the intellectual property regime compatible with the SDGs. As you know, that in certain cases, for example, in the case of the AIDS epidemic, we made an exception to the IP regime in the WTO and allowed the production of the AIDS treatment, vaccines and treatment without the application of the IP restraints. I believe that a similar action needs to be taken today with regard to the COVID-19 vaccine, which should be available to everyone, everywhere, equitably with regard to whether they are in developed or developing countries, whether they are rich or whether they are poor. So this is a second example, but we need to go across the board and to see what are the development objectives that should call for the exceptions to the IP regime's constraints. And I believe that if we go through the SDGs, we can map what are those essential goals where the IP regime must be made more flexible in order to enable developing countries to utilize those technologies in an affordable way and apply them for development. The second element of this exercise, in my view, would be to focus on what are the objectives for research and development in science and technology. I think we have seen in this COVID crisis that when we needed this vaccine, the money required to invest in the research for the vaccine was unlimited. Billions of dollars have been deployed in order to develop this vaccine at an accelerated pace. So within a year, we have multiple possibilities of a vaccine being developed because it was a compulsion. It was a requirement for the world. And therefore, the money was found in order to deploy for the development of this vaccine. In a similar way, we need to go through the whole SDG agenda and see what are the objectives that are critical for the developing countries in terms of scientific research and technology as such. And once we are able to identify that, then we need to convince all the research and development capabilities across the world, both in developed and developing countries. And there are considerable capabilities in academia, in scientific institutions, in corporations. But today, those research and development facilities, even in academia, are connected only to the corporations. It is the corporations, it is the profit motive which directs research and development. It is not the development objectives, it is not the human objectives which are directing research and development in these institutions. And we need to change that. And we need to identify objectives which serve the SDGs, which serve human development rather than corporate profits. So that is the second area in which we need to work on science and technology. And third, and perhaps the most urgent, is the question of bridging the digital divide. I think that without the digitalization of the economies of the developing countries, we will find it very difficult to adapt to the new and modern methods of investment, of business, of trade, etc. The Secretary General has spelled out a roadmap for the for the bridging the digital divide. It's a good roadmap, and the ECOSOC should see how it can help and bring in the countries and the companies and the corporations and the civil society, which needs to be brought into the mix in order to bridge this digital divide in the world. So it is an ambitious agenda, Hanifa, and obviously we will not be able to achieve it in one day, but we need to initiate the work in specific directions that are promoting the SDGs, avoiding climate change, and addressing the COVID crisis. I hope that this can be promoted not only with the participation of member states, but it will require the participation of the private sector. It will require the participation of civil society and of individuals who are dedicated and committed to achieving the goals of that we have spelled out: the COVID crisis, the SDGs, the climate change objectives, as well as promoting the central goal of equality in the world. I think the Secretary General was very eloquent when he spoke recently to the Nelson Mandela at the Nelson Mandela lecture, when he stated that inequality is the hallmark of our era. And this inequality has been made so visible by this COVID crisis. The inequality between the impacts on the poor and the impacts on the rich, the inequality in the money that is being deployed in the richer countries and the lack of money in the poorer countries. These manifestations of inequality need to be addressed, and we can only do it through an exercise of solidarity between the rich and poor countries, solidarity between the peoples of the world and civil society, as well as solidarity with the business world, which has a large debt to pay to peoples of the developing countries. So thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions and comments.
I want to really pay tribute to the UN 75 People Declaration. They echo the declaration of member states, and for the first time in my whole year with NGOs, I saw two parallel entities, not working on silo, but working together. And this is what we want to achieve. We want to achieve this coordination and this partnership. So that UN 75 People Declaration went to the GA and was received by His Excellency Mr. Tijani Mohammed Bende. So I think if you continue this cooperation with civil society, not only with business by now with the Global Compact, it's almost steady, it's great, it's going fine. But if you bring the civil society, I think you might succeed, which I wish you will.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, of course, it is my intention to work very closely with civil society. I think we need the energy and the commitment of civil society in order to promote the goals of equality and equity, which is at the center of all the efforts that we need to make. Those are central principles, and I think that we can find no better partners than civil society in promoting those objectives. So I hope to work very closely, and I hope to receive the support of.
You have it already.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Gupta, I pass the floor up to you. On questions?
Your Excellency, I have one question. You're talking about something that I think is extremely important, and that's the inequality being the hallmark of our current state of our world. I completely agree with you, but I think that it is also very important for the developing world to take some responsibility for their own behavior. And I think that that is part of the problem, that basically they have their hands out, but they are not trying to achieve an equitable world where people can cooperate with each other. And so how do you think that that issue can be addressed?
Thank you. It's a good question, Steen, and obviously all of us need to make the effort to promote the goals that we've all agreed upon. The SDGs are now the agreed agenda that we have before us. The climate goals are agreed agenda we have committed. And obviously, developing countries need to make the contribution, and quite often they fall short. And they fall short quite often because of the inherent weaknesses that they have. Because it's partly, it's a kind of chicken and egg issue. They don't have the resources to build capacity. And the lack of capacity, therefore, fails to reach the standards to which they are expected to live. So I think to break that vicious cycle, you need to first assist the developing countries to build the standards, to build the capacities, to build the governance standards that are required as such. But they can only turn to governance when they are not in a survival mode. Most developing countries are living day to day. They are on survival mode, especially now with this COVID crisis. There's a question of how to feed people. People are hungry. The economies of developing countries have contracted by up to 25%. 100 million people are being pushed back into poverty. All the achievements of the last 1 decade are being reversed by this crisis as such. So if a leadership in a developing country is preoccupied with survival, and from this preoccupation with survival comes socio-political impacts, because there is disruption in society. When there is not enough to go around, people then begin to feed on each other. And that disrupts societies. The internal conflicts that happen are because of shortages, because of poverty. So we need to break the cycle, we need to address poverty first, and governance second, and then to hold the developing countries to standards which the richer countries, let's face it, the richer countries did not reach those standards of good behavior, good governance, until they were at a certain level of affluence, a certain level which could give them the ability to afford to look at themselves, to look at how to improve human rights, how to improve social behavior, and so forth. So we have to start somewhere, and the start has to be, in my view, to address the issue of poverty and development in the first place.
Thank you, but I just wanted to mention something. In 1994, during the population summit in Cairo, one of the issues that was addressed, and I know because I happened to speak to the General Assembly, was the situation of overpopulation. And as you know, that was in 1994. Since then, we have added more than 3 billion people into this planet. And nothing has been focused on. It's still, people do not take the responsibility of bringing children into the world that they cannot feed, clothe, or educate. And how do you think that issue can be addressed? Because in my opinion, one of the biggest problems that we have, whether it's with climate change or even COVID or diseases, is the fact that we're close to 8 billion people, when 50 years ago we had 2 billion people. So I would like to know your opinion on this, and how can that be addressed?
Yes, population is a double-edged sword. Population, if there is a population growth, rapid population growth, and if that population growth is accompanied by development, by education, by skill development, then that population growth is a positive growth, because the GDP of countries is calculated on the basis of how much a population multiplied by their productivity and the production. So if you see the growth in the global economy, the growth has been in the most populous countries. The growth has been in China, in India, and others where there is rapid growth, but that growth has to be accompanied by education and skills. If population growth happens without education and skills, it is a negative. Then it is a drag upon the country concerned and the economy, because the population sucks the resources of that country, and it drags down the socio-economic structures of that country, and then you have situations where societies break apart, there are internal conflicts, and this is happening all across. If you see the Middle East, North Africa, etc., we have that problem. So you're right in that respect. It's not only a question of controlling the rise of population, it is the question of how you develop and treat the population that you have and the growth in the population, how you're able to address those skills. And for that, you require resources. It all comes back down to two things. One, resources, and second, governance.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Apoorv, over to you.
Thank you, Ambassador Akram, for helping us understand your three-pronged agenda to the United Nations Economic and Social Council. I have a message and question from His Excellency Ambassador Mohammed Idris, the permanent representative of Egypt. He congratulates you for your election to the presidency of the Economic and Social Council and indicates his commitment to strengthen the support and work of the Council under your leadership. The question he asks is, how can we create strong and effective links between bankable infrastructure projects in developing countries, no interest rates in developed countries, and how can we meet the global infrastructure gap and the role of multilateral development banks in this regard?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gupta. Thank you. And a very important and relevant question from my dear brother Mohammed Idris, Ambassador of Egypt. As I tried to explain, the gap for the developing countries in terms of infrastructure investment is the lack of ability to formulate good development projects. When a developing country is able to formulate a good development project, whether by itself or with the assistance of a multinational corporation or of another government, those projects usually are able to get the investment possible. So we need to find ways to help developing countries which do not have that capacity or which do not have sufficient capacity to develop viable infrastructure projects. And my proposal and my thought is to create that mechanism under the umbrella of the United Nations. It may not be one mechanism, it could be more than one mechanism. The World Bank is working on it, UNDP has certain programs, the private sector has certain programs, the GIDS program, but we need to bring it all together. And for example, the sequence could be a small African country has a plan to put up a new sustainable energy project, solar energy project. It can come to this mechanism under the umbrella of the UN and allow that mechanism to either prepare the feasibility study or to ask another developing country or developed country to help to prepare that feasibility or pre-feasibility study. And there is plenty of experience with solar project development in developing countries. Therefore, it can get that assistance to prepare that pre-feasibility study. Once that pre-feasibility study is done, which costs hardly $100,000, $200,000, it's the expertise which is lacking, and that is the gap that needs to be met. And then that pre-feasibility study can be taken to an investor. For example, an investor like Blackstone or BlackRock or an investment institution in the Middle East, like the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, or the Qatar Investment Authority, or the Kuwait Investment Authority. All of them invest in infrastructure. All of them are looking for good investment projects. And therefore, you can take a pre-feasibility study to an investor in the market or to a bank who could say, okay, I will finance, I will put up the $1 million required to develop the feasibility study, to make this a bankable project. I will put up the $1 million and I will take 5% equity in the project.
Thank you so much.
Please ask, were you able to put the ambassador from Egypt on the video, or he cannot get connected?
We're trying to get him. Ambassador Akram,
I'm sorry.
Ambassador Mohammed Idris would like to come on, take the floor and sort of thank you personally as well. He also thanks the kind invitation granted by Ms. Hanifa and to the World Information Transfer, and Dr. Doe, back to you as well for organizing this webinar in such an important moment. Ambassador Akram, I'd like to go back to one of your previous issues across the UNESCO ECOSOC that you mentioned. You're obviously inheriting the presidency at a very important and critical time. We have questions coming in from students in Ukraine who are asking, what are the 3 things, according to you, that the Economic and Social Council has done correctly in light of this crisis? And what 3 things would you amend under your presidency?
I wanted to mention, Your Excellency, that we have a program. I have a program that we give scholarships to students all over Ukraine, and they are all on the video. So that's why a group from there. We also have interns from South Korea, China, or Hong Kong, China, and Taiwan, who also are viewing this webinar.
Pleasure. That's I'm very flattered that your associates are following this webinar. To come back to the question about three things done well, I think last year, under the leadership of my colleague Ambassador Mona Juul of Norway, the ECOSOC did some important things. I believe that the most important thing that happened during the last session was the establishment of the panel on illicit financial flows. This was a panel that was established by the ECOSOC president jointly with the president of the General Assembly. It's called the FACTI panel, and this is going to study all the illicit financial flows that are happening in the world, especially from developing to the developed countries. It is estimated that $1 billion in criminal proceeds are transferred every year. $1 trillion is transferred every year in criminal proceeds from the developing to safe havens across the world. And that is a major issue that needs to be addressed. There is also financing of other illicit corruption, terrorism, all kinds of other illicit financial flows that are taking place. And this panel is going to address them. And there is a proposal that the UN should create a central body which can coordinate the activities with regard to illicit financial flows. So that's one important thing that happened last year. The second, I think, was a very important discussion which was created at the high-level political forum. It was in the aftermath of the COVID crisis, and there were some important suggestions with regard to dealing with the COVID crisis. I think that was an important aspect. And the third thing, I think, which ECOSOC established last year was this tradition of joint initiatives between the Economic and Social Council and the General Assemblies. There were several events that were held jointly, and I think that that is an important tradition that's been established, and which I would hope to follow. So those are three good things. Corrections, there are too many to recount, but many can do better.
Okay, do we have
Exactly.
Oh, Mrs. Hanifa, can I ask a question? I'm Gloria Kins.
Yes, of course, Gloria.
Thank you. I wanted to tell the ambassador, he made a very important point about the developing countries sharing information on water wells. Which are the best buys? Which are the best qualities? Which ones will last longer? Also with solar panels. I've been involved in that with Chad for many, many years. And Kuwait kindly did invest in Chad in water wells and in solar panels. And the problem was to get the finest ones, not only by price, but that would last in the country. One of the problems is the cheaper ones don't endure. So I wanted to thank the ambassador for that observation. I know that in the Cameroon and the whole Chad basin, they're putting in solar panels and they're putting in water wells, so they could all share the best information.
I just wanted to mention something, thank you, that so far there has been no finding of how to handle the solar panels once they are old and cannot be used. In other words, there is just no recycling method for the solar panels as of now, and they are toxic. The issue of how to use or what to do with the solar panels is a big issue that is not addressed at all, and it should be addressed as soon as possible, because we're putting more and more solar panels, and then what happens to them when they are not usable, and how do we recycle them? So far, there's absolutely no way of doing it.
Thank you, Dr. Gloria. The central role of ECOSOC, proposing new opportunities once and when the recovery will take place, including innovative strategy to incorporate or to adapt into our work on a global scale. And one way to do that, I would like to leave you with one word: revitalize multilateralism. The question facing us, facing you, is that what can we do? NGO, civil society, member state, academia, to shape or reshape our approaches to the SDG implementation and to ensure that those goals are going to be implemented. The last word is for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Hanifa. I think we all realize that we are living in challenging times, and not only because of COVID, but because the powers that be are stepping away from the principles of the UN Charter, which are the fundamental basis on which our world order has existed for the past 75 years. The principles of non-use of force, principles of non-interference, of non-unilateralism, of promoting solutions through international cooperation rather than unilateral efforts. So I think we are facing a difficult world, and together with this COVID crisis and the climate challenge that we have, these are obviously challenging times for us. The central role of civil society, therefore, I think, is to proclaim the fundamental importance of respect for the UN Charter and its principles. I think if civil society were to demand that the governments of the world, the governments who they represent, the governments, the countries from which they come, that each government respect the Charter, respect the principles of the Charter above narrow national interest. I think that could be a powerful message that civil society could promote across the world. We may have a chance to keep the world order that we have alive for another 75 years at least.
Thank you so much. Gopal, your floor is back if you want to close.
I just want to say, Your Excellency, thank you very, very much for very, very important 3 points that you raised. I think that the specific issues, the financial, the sustainable, and the science and technology, and how we can basically improve the world situation, hopefully with the help of the developing world, revitalizing their own political and problems, because otherwise there's always going to be a divide. We know from the study of the human nature that if people do not cooperate with each other and they only ask for handouts, it just does not work. We need to work together. And I'm just very, very impressed by all the facts and the points that you brought in. And I know that all our interns are going to be writing reports. They're all responsible for writing them. And if you wish, I'll be able to send some of them to you. But thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. And we are most grateful.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Hanifa. Thank you, Mr. Gupta. And all the participants, very kind of you to spare time for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And thank you everyone who's joined us in another series of World Information Transfer's Virtual Voices series. Next, on the 2nd of September, we have Hedva Ser, who is the UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador and Special Envoy for Cultural Diplomacy. After that, on the 9th of September, we have Chantal Line Carpentier, who is the Director of UNICTAD. Thank you very much, Ambassador, once again, and everyone who's joined us this afternoon.